Hey everybody, Kenny here. So with the new league coming up, I decided to put together a build recommendation just to help anyone who doesn't know what they really want to focus on at the beginning. And so I went through all of my builds and found essentially the only one that wasn't severely kind of, I guess, hampered, if you will, by the new balance changes. This was the only one that kind of I can recommend and know that you won't run into any issues where like the skill will be removed when the update goes through on Friday. Which this video is going to move up on Friday, so if you're seeing this, then the update is imminent. So this is actually an updated version of my Trickster build. However, this is going to be completely different than what I did in my previous Trickster build. In that one, it was entirely a cast while channeling build. And while I love that build, it is one of the what's the word over here? It's one of the victims of of the many changes in the coming league. So since I had a free passive reset, figured might as well update the build, put it in line with what the state of the game is going to be when the update goes live. So I took some ideas from some of the other builds I had been working on, some that I thought would work well, but because of, once again, because of the many changes coming this league, I felt that, they wouldn't have worked as well as being like something interesting to show with those particular characters. So I kind of like combined those ideas into a singular idea with my Trickster that I think is actually a very low cost introduction for anyone interested in getting into Path of Exile. So skill wise, really all we're looking at here is this is a cast on crit build using Reeve and Wave of Conviction. Now the reason that I'm using these two specific skills is that the kind of damage area of Reeve and Wave of Conviction kind of overlap. So, like while you're attacking with Reeve, like that kind of conal area in front of you is the same area the Wave of Conviction is going to be hitting. And the reason that I'm using these two skills specifically is that the idea here is that we're doing a elemental ailment build using our Trickster. So what that entails is we go for elemental focus right here in the shadow starting area, which gets us our initial elemental damage and increases the effect of our ailments, as well as the duration of our elemental ailments. Then down in this section here, grab some more elemental damage with attack skills, as well as make it that our attacks penetrate enemy elemental resistances. And we also grab the elemental mastery that makes it that any exposure we inflict is at least 18% of the affected resistance. And that's important because we are using Wave of Conviction, and one of the hallmarks of this skill is that it causes exposure. Right there on the bottom, you see exposure applies minus 15% to elemental resistance, matching the highest damage taken. And Wave of Conviction deals physical, lightning, and fire damage. And all the way down here, down by the ranger area, we go and we grab this extra weapon elemental damage with attack skills. And then, most importantly, these two nodes here, which give us a chance to freeze, shock, and ignite, as well as increasing our damage with elemental attack skills. Initially, I really wanted to work in some curse nodes into here so I could get the curse mastery that increases our chance to freeze, ignite, and shock enemies who are cursed. But there just weren't enough points to get there and do all the other stuff we needed to do to be able to make this work as a cast-on crit build. So aside from those elemental nodes, we're obviously taking all of the increased crit chance that we have in the shadow area, as well as increasing our damage with elements while using one-handed weapons and getting as much attack speed as we can get, as well as grabbing the accuracy and critical strike nodes over here, as well as the accuracy mastery that applies extra accuracy to our flat bonus based on our dexterity, and grabbing the critical mastery that makes it that we have an additional 150% chance to crit against enemies that are on full life. And a very important set of skills to grab while making your way through the skill tree here is actually to grab at least the first life and mana on hit node and the life and mana leech additions from Clever Thief here. And the reason for that is that without those, the build doesn't feel good. Like, you know, like you need to have a source of recovery, and there just isn't anywhere else we're getting that here. Like if we had gear that happened to be giving leech or happened to be giving regen or damage, or or recovery on hit, anything like that, then it wouldn't be as much of an issue. But since none of the gear this character is wearing happens to have those things, it's kind of important to get these. If you happen to have recovery on the gear you're wearing, then you don't need to worry about these. You can ignore that unless it happens to be that you're seeing that you need to start working in some recovery into your build in some means. Because in that case, I definitely recommend getting these, because having the recovery on kill is nice, but it only gets you so far. Like I went polymath again, but once again, as I mentioned, the recovery that we're getting, even with all of these masteries taken, as nice as the recovery is, it's only good when you're killing enemies. If you're against a single strong enemy, then you're not killing enemies, you're fighting an enemy. So you don't have any form of recovery at all. And that's why I kind of feel that this is an important inclusion. But it's up to you based on what you're actually wearing. Speaking of gear, what I have here is pretty much the same set that I was wearing when I did my original Trickster build. The main additions are that I changed out the weapons from the daggers that they were wearing before, which are still here, but sitting in the back set, with 2 rapiers that happen to have all of the elemental damage types on them. So this one is just a rapier that I got from a Vow dungeon that happened to drop corrupted with all 3 elemental damage types on it. And this one, it had 2 of the 3, and so I just crafted the 3rd onto it. But the reason for that is just that I thought it'd be a fun idea to do all 3 of the elemental damage types, but you don't have to do it that way. If you wanted to, instead of going and doing elemental proliferation and elemental weakness, you could go and run combustion and flammability or frostbite, and it's just occurring to me that that the support is called Ice Bite. Frostbite and Ice Bite. You could run Frostbite and Ice Bite. You could run conductivity and innervate. You could do this however you like, depending on what weapon you actually have on. If it's a weapon that is basically just physical damage and just one, a good amount of one type of elemental damage, then you can cater this to whatever best fits your style. Your gear setup, your preferred skill setup. You don't even have to use Reeve and Wave of Conviction. If you wanted to swap that out with lacerate or, ethereal knives or, well, no, I think ethereal knives counts as a spell, so probably not that. But, if you wanted to swap that with another kind of conal spell, or like it doesn't even have to be a conal spell. It could be just something that does damage in an area, an attack that does damage in an area, then using the crits off that to cast, something that causes exposure, like Ice Bomb or Hydrosphere, whatever it is that you are like more comfortable playing around with. Like, because the point here isn't to specifically do a Reeve and Wave of Conviction build with cast on crit. It's to do a very low investment build that you can get going easily. And that's the whole idea here. Also, I happen to be running the Summon Ice Golem because it gives additional crit chance, and I'm using Assassin's Mark. Obviously, I can't use both Assassin's Mark and my Elemental Weakness aura. The reason that I have both is that in the cases where I'm fighting an enemy and there aren't a bunch of enemies around, and it's a kind of tougher fight, I will turn off my Elemental Weakness and then turn on my Assassin's Mark and play it that way instead. Like just throw on the Assassin's Mark on the enemy and then go at them with my Reeve until, like it's procced enough that, like I have all the exposure that I want on them. Because the whole thing is that we want to get our exposure going, because without the exposure, you're not doing as much damage. Like a Reeve is doing pretty good damage, but you need the exposure going in order to do all the damage. And I'm also running Clarity just for some additional mana regen. With all that out of the way, let's see it in action. As usual, I'm using the beach area just because, as I've mentioned, I feel that the mobs here are kind of a more difficult challenge than what you see in most of the other areas in the game. Like just the addition of all of the the dogs that do the burning ground, and the bunch of these guys who do like the little sniping, and the kind of ice rain snipers that kind of throw down all of their projectiles. Yeah, that right there. Because those just they crit like crazy, and but going through the rest of the act, I feel like everything else is very simple, and until you get kind of to, I would say, Act 7 or Act 8. I forget which is the one when you go back into the beast. One of those I remember being just a pain to get through the available the enemies that appear there. Also, something that I don't really do with my when I showcase my build recommendations that I'm gonna do this time, just because I feel that it's kind of an important thing to point out, with the effectiveness of this particular build. If we head into the prison, this is actually a character that I don't discourage you from fighting the caged enemies. And what I mean by that is in Path of Exile, generally, when an enemy is if it's a normal, magic, or rare, usually there isn't a massive difference, depending on the enemy. But certain enemies, when they get upgraded to rare, become an entirely different beast than you see in other enemy types. But for some reason, the enemy that's kind of in a cage, when that one turns into a rare, it becomes something else entirely. Like honestly, like like I actually, for most builds, I do not recommend even fighting those things. Like they are like like if you see them in maps, run. Like they are not something that you can handle with most builds. In like most builds that you can put together, cannot handle those things. Like they are just too much. They like if you happen to get one that rolls with extra life and with health regen, then like they are immortal. Like they are like you will not be able to kill that thing unless you are running a build that does the most damage possible. Like the absolute top damage that you can do in this game is what you need if you want to be able to kill those enemies with those two particular mods on them. That said, with this build, this specific build, like they actually aren't too bad. I mean, they still take a while to get down, but compared to what just about any other build that I take through, like this particular content, like it's actually, it's doable. It's like as you can see, like these things, like when they are, like when they have any kind of like rare mod on them, like they, for whatever reason, like their health just skyrockets. Like they just go to ridiculous levels. Like in this one doesn't even have like the extra health mod on it or anything like that. Just overwhelms physical resistances, it curses, it has Weeping Sorrow, which I think Sorrow is what is cold damage. But generally, like if you find one of these things with a rare mod on it, and obviously like on this one's a bit tougher just because it happens to be an essence monster. But like like even if it wasn't just an essence monster, like like when you run into these guys, they just have an impossible amount of health. Like like it's just like they will normally have around as much health as whatever the boss is for that area. And that's if they don't have the extra health thing on. If they have the extra health thing on, then you're talking probably double or even more whatever the boss for the area has in health. So like like I almost always skip these guys with every character just because like they are such a pain to deal with just about anything. Yeah, so code resist. Sorrow is cold. Grab that extra blasphemy. Yeah, but I just wanted to show that this is a build that even though it's so simple, even though it's basically just one skill and occasionally switching off the aura in order to use the mark, like this is something that you definitely can. Yep, I turned my clarity back on. You definitely can run with a, like I said, pretty cheap setup. Because, because you don't have, like I said, you don't have to use Wave of Conviction. You don't have to use Reeve. Use whatever combination of skills you want. Like, like the main things are just that you are exploiting elemental weaknesses in some way. Whether it's with elemental proliferation, combustion, innervate, cold bite, conductivity, flammability, like whatever it is that however it is that you want to do it. Like like this is something that will support it. You just need to make sure that you have decent weapons to be able to do that. Because obviously, if you're trying to do full cold damage and you aren't wearing weapons that have cold damage on it, then that's not going to help you any. But yeah, like this is a very simple to put together build. Like you don't necessarily need to do this as a trickster. Like I did as a trickster just because it was the class that I had a full reset available to me with. But I could have done this as any other kind of shadow, or even possibly a ranger or a scion with some minor tweaks. Like like if If I did Scion, then I would go through the spell damage to make my way over here, and then kind of like start working my way, like reversing my way through this build using that idea. I just would kind of like ignore this section here, and probably... Actually, I probably have to give up this whole part here. So you lose some attack speed and... Let me see, that's 10%, and Harrier gets you 8%, yeah. So you lose some attack speed and some life. Actually, and some crit also, because, I mean, that's, yeah. So you have a critical spot here, so you could make up the crit there, but you can't, like, actually, and there's some life here also, but you know, but like the number of points that I used here, if you were to go Scion, you would only kind of be replacing what you were losing in certain cases. Because like I said, you know, like you wouldn't really get these back until you had enough points to go back in there. But you'd have to use up the points that you needed for that to be able to make it over this far. And then from Ranger would be easier to do because you'd only need to use up your points to get kind of to here, and then you could work your way through everything else that way. So you really only lose maybe this section here. Yeah, but it's a very simple to put together build. I highly recommend trying it out. Like, you will be able to get very far with this, and all of the skills that I recommended, you know, these are things that you'll have for most of your playthrough, because the only thing that you can't do right from the start is you won't be able to do cast on crit, and you won't be able to do elemental weakness and blasphemy. You know, these will open up to you in Act 3. This will open up to you in Act 4. But the rest of this, you know, there's very few skills being used in this build. You know, I've got Dash here. I've got Assassin's Mark. Assassin's Mark is also an Act 3 thing. Ice Golem, Act 4. But, you know, but everything else, again, this is a fairly low level to access gem setup. Yeah, that's going to be it for this. Hopefully, if you decide to give this a shot, you know, you let me know whether this was helpful to you. I'm looking forward to giving some more build recommendations as the league goes on. But until next time, if you enjoyed listening to this old man talk about RPGs and I appreciate doing other YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe. But next time, Ve Victus, Virus Numeris, and bye.